Hello, my name is Stephanie DeLussy. I am a veteran special education teacher and current IEP coach. I'm also an author of the Intentional IEP, and I'm the teacher author behind Mrs. D's Corner and the Intentional IEP. Today, I want to talk about a topic that I see so frequently within special education Facebook groups and on social media, and it's that topic of if my students aren't on grade level, how do I write their IEP goals, but also what do I teach them during the school day? Are they being taught the grade level curriculum or am I teaching them through prerequisite skills? And so that is what I want to talk to you about today. First, we're going to start with IEP goals, and then we're going to move into implementation and the instruction in the classroom. So when it comes to IEP goals, I know that a lot of states and districts specifically want standards aligned or standards written IEP goals and objectives for your students. And while that's great, and I love that idea, standards are skills, right? So each standard, each strain of a standard, regardless of what state you are in, what standards you use, if it's Common Core, if it's TEKS, if it's the SOLs, whatever it may be, every standard that a student has to learn or master within a given grade level curriculum or content area is a skill. And so we write IEP goals for skills. We don't write IEP goals for standards. All of this to say, you should not be writing, and best practice tells us that you should not be writing IEP goals for standards. This means you shouldn't be taking the standard and putting that verbatim into a student's IEP as their annual IEP goal or as an objective. So how do you do standards aligned IEP goals when you have to write standards aligned content within a child's IEP? You do that through their prerequisite skills. Well, how do you find their prerequisite skills? You can do that one of two ways. So at the Intentional IEP, we do have our IEP Matrix. I pulled a piece of it here. Or you can use the grade level standards for whichever state or standards that your school is using. And so I'm just going to reference the Common Core. I've taught in many different states, and so I've used many different, but everybody knows the Common Core. So we're just going to stick with the Common Core. So let's say you have a student, and they need to have a third grade goal written for a specific standard, you're going to access, and your student is going to access that grade level content through prerequisite skills. To be able to meet those grade level curriculum content standards, your student has to first master those prerequisite skills. So what are prerequisite skills? Prerequisite skills are those skills that you need to master before you can master the next skill. So let's just, for example, say if we are working on multiplication, I cannot teach a student multiplication until they have mastered addition. I cannot teach a student addition until they have mastered number recognition, right? So these skills all build upon one another. Now there's lots of other skills in between all of those bigger sets of skills to get from number recognition to understanding addition to understanding multiplication. But that was just a very basic explanation of prerequisite skills to get you where you need to go, to get your students where they need to go. So how does this play into writing your IEP goals and your IEP objectives or benchmarks? Objectives and benchmarks are very different things. They're written the same in terms of SMART goals, but they are very different things in terms of how they are stacked. We're not going to get into that here, but I'm going to use the term objective. Whether you write objectives or benchmarks, it's going to work the same for how you're using prerequisite skills and tying them in with your grade level standard IEP goal. So remember, standards are skills. So we are writing IEP goals for skills. There are different ways that you can do this within an IEP. You can either choose to write the prerequisite skill as the annual goal and then break down that skill into smaller prerequisite skills underneath of it as the objectives or benchmarks. Or if your school is like, no, you need to verbatim write the standard as the IEP goal, then you're going to do that, but your objectives underneath, and you're going to write objectives, not benchmarks here if you are writing it this way. You're going to put objectives underneath that standard as the IEP goal, and the objective is going to be your prerequisite skills. Okay, so it could look either way. It depends on how your school wants you to do things. Best practice would lean more towards you're using those prerequisite skills as the annual goal and also as those objectives underneath that prerequisite skill for where they're going to be and how that's going to tie into the standard of whatever grade level content standard you're tying it into. So I know in the state of Texas, they do have this already done and mapped out for you in the vertical alignment. So some states do have this available for you. Again, you can use your state standards. Essentially what you're going to do is you're going to just say pull up Common Core ELA, pull up maybe text structure for third grade or fluency for third grade, whatever it may be. And then you're going to pull up second grade for that exact strand. And you're going to pull up first grade for that exact strand, and kindergarten for that exact strand. And you're going to work backwards until you find the standard where your student is currently performing, the skill, right? How is your student and where are they? What is their baseline data showing you? So before you can choose IEP goals, you have to have baseline data. You have to have your present levels written, which is where we start when writing IEP goals. But we're not going to get into that either today. So you have to be able to know where a student has to be or where their peers are, right, with the grade level content. And you have to know where the student currently is, because that is how you're going to determine where on that prerequisite line are we going to put that student? What can they master within the given annual year? And then based off of this prerequisite skill and where the student currently is, what skills are in between here that the student can master as objectives or benchmarks to get here as close as possible to that grade level content. Does that make sense? Now, when it comes to teaching these IEP goals and accessing the general education curriculum in the classroom, this is where your SDI comes into play. So your specially designed instruction, right? And I have some blog posts, I'm going to link them below this training here, all about SDI. So SDI is not a curriculum. It's not something that you purchase separate. It's not a place. So it's not one of your LREs or least restrictive environments. It's not a curriculum. SDI is what IEPs are meant for. So how are you going to help the student equitably access the general education curriculum? You do this through the supports and services written into the IEP. We have those IEP goals that are going to align with that SDI. And so what you're going to do when they're in the general education classroom, if they're learning grade level content, that's when you're going to provide them with those supports and services, right? Those accommodations, those modifications. Do they need additional services while they're in there? This might be where your service minutes come into play. If they're in an inclusion classroom, you go in to service that student in that classroom, provide that SDI for that student to access the general education content and curriculum. Now, if you're pulling a small group out or you're working in the back of the classroom with a smaller group, you can provide SDI in that manner. And that may also be when you're working on those prerequisite skills. Now, that could be before the lesson, that could be after the lesson. It really just depends on the dynamic in that inclusion classroom and your classroom that you're teaching in. So that probably doesn't help. It's just very variable depending upon student, just like IEPs. IEPs are individualized, so is SDI. And so that's what it's going to look like when you're providing that content, when you're teaching that content to students in the classroom. If you are not in that classroom with the student, when it comes time to teach grade level content and they haven't quite mastered it, they're not quite there yet, that's when the general education teacher is going to provide those accommodations, those modifications, those supports and services. General education teachers and paraprofessionals can provide SDI under the supervision of a special education teacher. They cannot teach initial SDI. They can do reteaching, but you need to provide that modeling for them and teach them how to do it and supervise them while they are doing it. So they can provide SDI. It just, again, depends on the classroom setting and what that looks like and your influence and collaboration with that general education teacher in that classroom. Okay. I hope this helps. I hope this breaks it down a little bit more in terms of using prerequisite skills to not only write IEP goals, but also implement these prerequisite skills into the classroom, as we are so often told that we need to, oh my goodness, take these grade level standards and students have to be learning these grade level standards. And yes, they do. They're going to be accessing them through prerequisite skills. We're going to get them there through the supports and services and the SDI written into their IEP. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to me at the Intentional IEP here on the YouTube channel, or you can send me a message through the Intentional IEP's website. If you have more questions, again, everything is linked below. There's some additional blog posts about SDI, about objectives and benchmarks, about IEP writing, IEP goal writing, and all of the things. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for learning more. I will see you in the next training.